Well, hello, you're watching Scotland at 7. I'm Hugh Stewart. Well, tonight we move into the second week of COP26 here in Glasgow, and we have two guests for you, whom I'll introduce later on. Shortly, we're about to go through the news headlines and tonight's coronavirus update. But can we just go to our visitors tonight? From Togo, we have Kaossara Sani. Can we see Kaossara? Hello. Hello, Kaossara. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can
That's
hear
good.
you.
And you're in Togo. Where are you in the capital?
Yes, I'm living in Lome.
So you're in the Lome tonight. Okay, good. I'm glad you could join
Yes.
us. So if you wouldn't mind waiting a few minutes, I'm going to go through the news headlines, and we're also joined by Siobhan Tolland, a bit nearer to home. Hello, Siobhan. Have you got a good sound through there?
Hopefully,
Okay,
yeah,
good.
hopefully.
Right, so we're going to discuss the developments and prospects for the second week of the COP conference. But let me first of all read out today's coronavirus update from Scotland. As of 2 p.m. today, a total of 3,482,293 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and the UK government testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 2,817,639 have been confirmed negative, and 664,654 have tested positive. There are 2,012 new cases of COVID confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There are 0 reported deaths of people who have tested positive, although that may be because registry offices are not open during the weekend. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 9,293. That number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 803 were in hospital last night, and 54 of those were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. today, 4,323,549 people have received the first dose of the COVID vaccination, and 3,917,210 have received a second dose. The latest UK daily figures show 141,862 patients have tested positive from COVID and who have sadly died from their illness, which is an increase of 57 since yesterday. That refers to deaths in all settings, not just in hospitals. And now tonight's news headlines before we move on to the discussion on COP26. Our first story, anti-independence Facebook ads funded by an unregistered campaigning organisation. Scotland Matters, a pro-union group registered with the Electoral Commission, received donations amounting to £46,000 from an unregistered organisation called the Centre for Economic Education and Training, the CEET, which lists its address at a virtual office service in London in breach of electoral law. The money was used to pay for an anti-independence Facebook advertising campaign in the Scottish parliamentary elections of May the 6th this year. The lack of clarity over the source of these donations has raised questions over dark money raised outside Scotland by groups campaigning against Scottish independence. Scotland Matters was set up by former members of the Better Together campaign, including Professor Hugh Pennington. It argued for tactical voting against the SNP in the Holyrood elections in May by placing ads on Facebook and on billboard sites. Most of its £165,000 of funding came from anonymous sources. And now the emergency debate on MPs' standards in Westminster. Following last week's U-turn by Boris Johnson and the UK government, North East Fife MP Wendy Chamberlain was granted an emergency debate in the House to discuss the conduct of the UK government and the Conservative Party in the Owen Paterson lobbying discipline debate. Owen Paterson resigned his North Shropshire seat following the U-turn last week. The Parliamentary Standards Committee had earlier found that Mr Paterson was in breach of the accepted standards of the House by engaging in paid lobbying for two companies, Lynn's Country Foods and the diagnostics company Randox, which subsequently received a UK government contract worth £133 million. Boris Johnson was not in Parliament today for the debate, which continues now while we are on air. And on that subject, there was today a call for a ban on MPs having consultancy and lobbying jobs on the side. The House of Commons Standing Committee is considering a ban on MPs taking payments for holding consultancy jobs following the Owen Paterson paid lobbying affair. Over 30 MPs, mostly Conservatives, are recorded as receiving anything from a few hundreds of pounds a year to over £180,000 in one case. MPs receive a salary of £82,000. Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the International Trade Secretary, said she would consider such a ban, but did not think that MPs should be prevented from having other jobs, as this brings a richness to the Parliament. House of Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is considering whether to bring forward his own proposals on this matter. Today, also, Westminster heard a statement read out by Sajid Javid on the David Fuller case. Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary for England, today made a statement to Parliament about the convicted murderer David Fuller and the hundreds of serious sexual offences which came out during that investigation. Fuller was accused of the murders of a hospital worker and has admitted murdering 2 women in 1987 and sexually abusing at least 100 female corpses, including children. Investigators said that Fuller would work late shifts and go into the hospital morgue after the other staff had left. Mr. Javid said in the House that Kent police had spent hundreds of hours investigating this huge number of offences over the years and advised concerned members of the public to log on to the help page or to a special phone number which Kent police have set up. Hundreds of relatives have already been in touch today. Now, turning to UK-EU trade disputes, Simon Coveney warns that the EU could shelf the Brexit trade deal if UK triggers Article 16. The Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney today warned that the EU could retaliate by setting aside the post-Brexit trade deal if the UK triggers Article 16. Effectively, if the UK walks away from the Northern Ireland Protocol, the consequences could be a trade war between the UK and the EU. Industry leaders have said such a move could have devastating consequences for business. Hijacked bus set aside on the outskirts of Belfast. 4 masked men hijacked a double-decker bus near Rathcoole, Newton Abbey in County Antrim yesterday evening. Passengers were told to get off the bus before it was set alight by the hijackers. This is the 4th time this year that such an event has occurred, amid an increase in unrest in the Loyalist community over the Brexit agreement and the Northern Ireland Protocol. So those are the main headlines, and the main discussion tonight, of course, is with our 2 guests as we look forward to the second week of the COP26 conference here in Glasgow. Now, so once again, can I say hello to Siobhan? And hello, Siobhan, can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you fine.
Good.
Yep.
And Kaossara in Togo. How's the sound, Kaossara? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I'm having issue with the network.
It's not very. Yeah, the connection's not very good, I'm afraid, with Lomé tonight. Let me just kick off by, if you don't mind, Kaossara, I have here some comments you made earlier, so I'm going to read out Kaossara's comments. Kaossara is a peace and climate activist from Togo, and you are in a small country in West Africa, and you are listed in one of the world's 46 least developed countries. You pointed out that more than 1 billion people spread across Africa and the Asian Pacific region and the Caribbean are suffering disproportionately from the ever-increasing impacts of climate change, despite having historically contributed least to global warming, which causes it. Now, Kaossara, I have to say your words were echoed today by the Scottish First Minister, who's been talking on this topic in the COP summit here in Glasgow. Tell me, have you been paying attention to the discussions so far in week 1 of COP? Have you been able to follow the successes or the undertakings that have been given in week 1? We have I think that link has gone down, Siobhan, so we'll see if we can go back to Lomé in a couple of minutes. So, as I said, Siobhan, the First Minister, I think, would agree entirely with what Kaossara had to say. She was, in fact, herself saying that we are aware that the countries which have contributed least to global warming are the countries who are facing the worst damage caused by it. So there's no really, we agree with that, don't we?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that this is something that from local to international, it seems to always be the case that that those that don't make the damage end up becoming the ones worst affected by it. And there's a massive disparity across the globe in terms of wealth and now in terms of climate justice. The North or the West, we have to kind of start taking responsibility for that. We've created the climate mess. And those southern countries are the ones who are being affected, and it's that not just an understanding, because we can all say isn't that terrible, but we need to start acting according to that, and we need to take responsibility, and the North needs to take leadership, and it needs to take action, and that's the kind of big thing here, isn't it? I think that the whole COP at this moment, to me, feels that there is a gap between what we're saying and what we're actually going to do. There's vague plans for the future, but there's no, this is what we're going to do, and these are the plans on how to get it done. So I think that we really need to take it seriously, and we need to begin to kind of just absolutely get a grip. The big, we'll talk about this later, but I think that, and it's something that Karasaki had mentioned as well, that the big elephant in the room is like nobody seems to be mentioning the fossil fuel industry and the subsidies that these guys are getting across the board as well, which is one of the biggest barriers to preventing a reduction of fossil fuels and CO2 and methane as well. So there is massive issues, and the issue, and hopefully we'll get there's quite a lot of interference, actually. I don't know if the audience can hear that, but hopefully we'll get our kind of other speaker back. But there's massive impacts now and in the future for the developing world because of climate crisis. There's the weather is changing constantly. We need to kind of start thinking about kind of resilience. We need to start thinking about mitigation. We need to start thinking about compensation, and I know that that's something that's been mentioned as well, but we need to start thinking about not loans, not just kind of some money here and there.
Yep. Yes, well, of course, you've raised, first of all, the question of funding, and I think we can see now over in Lomé, Kaossara is telling us to act. Now, the whole tone of the second week, to take up what Siobhan said, can you hear me? I can see that you're...
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good.
I'm sorry for the network issue here.
No, I'm delighted that you're able to join us, Kaossara. So we were just talking about the climate justice, and we've just been agreeing that what's been said at COP26 is that the rich countries, of which we are one, have agreed that we have caused the problem, and it's up to us to pay for the solution. Now, I noticed from your comments earlier on, you're demanding action. Let me turn to the question of the $100 billion, because you've mentioned that in your statement I read earlier on. Already several years ago, we, the European Union and the Americans, have promised $100 million, but you're still waiting for it. So can you see it? Go ahead.
I think that the problem is not money. all the problem we have today, like starvation, like hunger crisis, climate change, and so on and so far, it's related to a political will. And today, our leaders are failing. I think they don't have this political will to make change. And for them, it seems like climate change is an opportunity or a solution. And talking about money, I mean the fund, the $100 billion, it's like they are telling us over a decade ago that they want to help us. I even don't know if this fund will be a loan or a grant. We still don't know that, this statement. And they are telling us that they want to help us with this fund from 2009, and today we are in 2021, and they are telling us that they can't fulfill this uh, agreement now. They have to wait for 2023. That means that, okay, 2023, when you die, we will give you this money. You know, it's like what we are living is the result of this long time, this historical tradition of exploitation, colonialism, imperialism, and so on and so far. So we are tired. And right now, people are living the climate crisis. For you, it's about future, for future generation. But for me, it's now.
So the climate crisis is not something that we're looking forward, we're fearing in the future. This is here now.
Yeah, it's like an oppression for me because I couldn't attend the COP, and at home I'm having issue with network. I can't speak out or express myself. And all these agreement, this deadly agreement they are going to sign again, it will affect me and over 1 billion people living in these 46 least developed countries. We are not victims of this crisis. You are making us victim with all your inaction and your addiction to fossil fuel. And really, we are in a state that if we don't change the old system, it will break down. It will fall down. You know, sometimes when you attempt a limit, you have to come back. And if you refuse, the new will take the advantage of your how can I say it? Because these people are like they are stubborn and they are playing with our lives. We are also human beings. We deserve to live in dignity. I don't know why we need to beg them. You know, even if rich countries give us all the money they have, they can never pay us what they did to us because it's not about money. And I think that there is no justice without accountability. If we cannot move on without accountability.
It's not about money, it's about justice. Now, that's again one of the points that our First Minister was saying today, but I think you've both raised the question of the vital central role that the fossil fuel industry
yes.
is responsible for. Siobhan, also over here in Scotland, also raised that point. I heard today that, I think it was a couple of days ago, Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia, they of course have a huge amount of coal. And Mr. Morrison of Australia was saying, we in Australia often get criticised for having a huge coal industry, but he turned the blame on China. He said, what's the point of us trying to mitigate when most of the world's pollution comes from China? So is it China's fault or is it the fault of Europe and America? Where do you think the fault lies and the most responsibility lies, Siobhan? Is it with us or is it with China who caused all the pollution?
With all due respect, the responsibility lies with every single one of us. It lies with every single country. And for a country like Australia to turn around and say, it's no your fault, it's China's worse, that's school classroom behaviour. It wasn't a me mess, it was him. He started it. You know, this is we're supposed to... We are in the middle of a climate crisis, okay? And as the thing I was saying, it's not just this some vague future that's going to kind of affect generations. It's affecting people now. You cannot possibly turn around and say, but it's not our fault. It's China's. Every country has to take responsibility. Every multinational has to take responsibility. Every single fossil fuel industry has to take responsibility. The thing that we could do now is actually start cutting fossil fuels and start cutting all subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. The International Energy Agency says that in order to reduce the temperature rise, and in order to reduce the effects of the climate crisis, all subsidies must stop to the fossil fuel industry, and we need to do it. We know it can be done. 50 odd countries have done it over the last 5 or 6 years. It just takes the will to do it. And to come away, I'm sorry, but God's sake, to come away with something like, oh, but what about us? What about China? That's no fair. Yes, okay. Do you know what? See if China doesn't meet the requirements. Okay, that's no good. That's awful. That's terrible. But that is not an excuse for every other country to say, oh, well, we're not doing it either then. Because this is not a game. It's not a PR exercise. The globe isn't fooled by some kind of weird PR where we go, oh, well, it wasn't me, it was them. This is absolutely serious. And I cannot believe that the Australian Prime Minister is coming away with nonsense like that. We need to all grow up. We need to take absolute responsibility here and start making really difficult choices and not try and foster the blame onto other countries or other organisations or so forth. We all have to play a role here.
So as Siobhan was saying, Kaossara, for Europe or China or America to blame each other, that really doesn't matter very much to you. You're not really interested in saying who's to blame. You're interested in seeing action and to seeing us moving away from fossil fuels. Can I ask you, Kaossara, you don't really make a lot of fossil fuels as far as I know. I don't know if coal. I don't know if anyone digs a lot of coal in Africa, but what is the potential for alternative energy in your country? Is there investment in solar power, and can you expect more of that?
I think I can clap for Togo in talking about renewable energy and transition, because Togo is one of the countries in West Africa which is investing in solar to give people access to electricity, and and also blaming each other about this. You are like blaming each other is a wasting of time. We are all responsible of this crisis. We need to realize that. And if China is in it, even Africa, I can say that Africa is not responsible. We are all responsible. Even if Africa has the opportunity to emit more than that, we will do it. It's human being, it's natural. So we are already we are facing the crisis. We need to forget this and join together and find a solution. And if we keep talking, time is running out. We don't need to fight each other, blaming each other, and let everything collapse like that. This is not our place. We are just passengers, and we must do everything to make sure that when we will go, this place will be livable for the next generation.
Now, of course, when it comes to moving on to new technologies, we do hear a great deal of that in the current COP. And what we're probably going to see, I think, is that America and Europe are going to be spending their climate money on building up alternative energy. But it's all about technological transfer, isn't it? Should we be making sure that the 46 poorest nations have the technology, have the ability to build up their alternative energies? What do you think of that, Sean? Do you think, Siobhan, do we need to support technological transfers of new technologies?
Well, not just in the developing nations across. I mean, we have to lead by example in kind of the north here. We have to start investing much more in renewable energies. One of the things that we can do in terms of the fossil fuel subsidies is actually kind of offer, refuse subsidies, but offer them if they start transferring immediately over into renewable energy. What I think we need to do, I mean, as Kaossara was saying that earlier on, it's not about money, but what it is, it's about helping anticipate the problems that will come with climate change. So that means basically building resilience and building strategies for defence for the future kind of bad weather that's going to kind of, quite frankly, wipe some areas out. So it's not just about kind of technology in the south of the globe. It's technology across the board, but it's also, as Kaossara is saying, it's about the political will. So it's kind of if we look at, I mean, I'm not going to go into the kind of whole process of the free market, which I think is probably one of the biggest issues and biggest problems that we have, and the biggest barrier to climate change that we have. But what we have is that we've got massive international corporations, we've got massive multinationals. If we continue to give them tax subsidies for developing fossil fuels and producing fossil fuels, then there will never be an incentive for those companies to move into renewables. So there's a kind of an issue there as well. We are the ones that are causing most of the kind of fossil fuel emissions. The north, that's what we're doing. It's like 90% comes from kind of the north. And the kind of so-called developing and developed countries. So it's much more complex than just giving money and giving technological know-how to the South countries. We have to lead by example, and we have to kind of do it here because we're the ones that are causing the emissions. We have to build much more resilience across the globe, and much more resilience, and help those countries that are suffering the most to build that resilience and to build the defence against the impact of climate. And that's one of the issues that's only beginning to be raised on the agenda now, is creating that resilience fund and resilience support to anticipate the devastating effects that will come and are coming year on year.
Now, I think that's a point I would like to take up with Kaossara, the point of resilience. A lot of the climate debate is driven by science, and certainly the United Nations and the IPC depend on the projections, the scientific projections. Now, one of those, which you've just reminded me of, Siobhan, is the idea of built-in warming. The idea that, Europe and then America have spent about the last 150 years pumping carbon into the atmosphere from coal and then from oil and now from gas. Now, you cannot stop that 150 years of warming overnight. As a matter of fact, you cannot really stop it until the end of this century. You have to really look at these things over a very, very long term. So what that means is, even if we stopped all fossil fuels this week, which we're not going to, it means the global warming is going to continue and the sea level rise is going to continue. We know this, don't we, Kaossara, as an absolute fact. Any coastal state is going to suffer from sea level rise, and there's nothing we can do about that. It will rise. Well, obviously, there's something we can do about that. It's this question of resilience. Now, can I ask you, first of all, Kaossara, before we discuss the finance again, is there any discussion in your country and in the other coastal states of West Africa about resilience, about building sea defences against storm damage or against the inundation of salt water? So can you build resilience?
For example, in Togo, they are working on a project called WACA, Wakaya. They are working together with other African countries, coastal countries like Senegal, Ghana, to be resilient when the sea will come. They are spending a lot of money in it. And I'm very sure that this money is a loan with interest. And what's amazing is that we will take this money to build maybe infrastructure to be resilient. And maybe in 10 years, we will have to do the same thing. And at the same time, our debt burden is keep rising. Why do you want us to find this money and pay you back? with all your interests. Sorry, but we have to be pragmatic and see what's really happening. We are the most affected. You are giving us money, not, as grant, but as loan to be resilient. And then you stop your addiction to fossil fuel, keep funding fuel companies. And then in 10 years or 5 years again, we'll come and say, oh, we are most affected. Please help us. And it keep growing. So that means that I and maybe my children and 4 children will be the world rentier classes, right?
I'm going to talk about funding and debt again in a couple of minutes, but first it occurs to me, because we just had a massive protest in Glasgow. In fact, we had two. We had the youth protest on Friday, and then a wider protest through a huge number of environmental activists came to this city on Saturday. Now, I think there might well have been something like 100,000 people there. It's impossible to guess how many. But I don't know if you know this, Kaossara, but we probably had the biggest political demonstration we have ever seen in this country just 2 days ago here in Glasgow. Police think there may have been 100,000 people here, but there's no way of counting. Now, the point I want to make to you, in case you didn't notice, is I'm quite sure if you spoke to any one of those 100,000 people from rich countries, from England and Scotland mainly, and some from Europe, I'm sure they would all agree with you. If you spoke to any one of the people who was in the streets of Glasgow last Saturday and said, do you think it's our moral responsibility to assist in resilience? Everyone, 100%, would have agreed with you. Siobhan, is that your impression? I see you nodding. Do you think we've got people on side here, but not the right people, not the people in power?
I think we do. I think we do. I think that, and I think that what is utterly inspirational about this is coming from the younger people. That I think that the youngsters are forcing the older ones to kind of, forcing us to have a look at this and forcing us to kind of, think about these things slightly differently. But I think across the board on any issue, you probably find a kind of an empathy and a sympathy and a kind of sense of responsibility. But it's like you say, it's like we have, beyond our voice and beyond our ability to march and beyond our ability to push and push and push, we have little power because the power remains within those buildings over the next kind of, or that last week and this week. But it's our responsibility to keep that going. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that people, I think for most people that's common sense. There is a moral responsibility here, but it's how that translates into political will, as Kaossara it talks about quite a lot, is the big question, and how we can force it to be translated into political will is the big question.
I noticed last week that as soon as he flew back from here to Washington, President Biden pushed through a $555 billion package through Congress. And some of that, probably quite a lot of that, is all about resilience. So I'm thinking, Kaossara, what you probably see is that if a rich country says we're going to spend $1 billion, most of that will be on ourselves, because everybody has a city by the sea. Everybody has a coastal city or a city which is on a tidal river. So I think you can bet, first of all, that we'll be spending the resilience money on ourselves. So maybe places like London will be surrounded by even bigger barriers, like they are in Amsterdam, to keep the waters out. So is that the sort of thing we'll need? Are we going to have to see that all of the coastal states, the islands such as, what are the islands that are most affected by sea level rise? It's places like the Maldives, the Seychelles, Fiji, Cuba, Bahamas. So for justice, if we're spending $1 billion preventing our cities from flooding, we should also be spending $1 billion preventing other people's cities from being flooded as well. So is that what you would say? Should we be spending some of that resilience with other people and not just spending it on ourselves? Kaossara, can you hear?
Yeah, I can hear you. No. It's completely different. What I'm saying is that, we didn't ask them, we didn't force them. They promised us to do it. What about the promise? The fact is, and have a proof of something is better than declaration. Like, I want to help you. Take something is better than I will give you 10 things. So they say that to help us. Maybe they are feeling that, yeah, we created this crisis. They feel that they are behind this crisis and they must help us. It's their responsibility.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the sound's gone again, but we'll try and get you back, Kaossara. And I'm going to turn on now to the question of debt, which I notice Siobhan Kaossara has informed us in the paper she sent us through earlier on, that when you balance on the one hand the $100 billion which we promised, which we still have not delivered, that was promised in 2009, but when you balance that against the debt which the poor countries already owe, then in fact they owe more than we've promised to give them. So the debt burden for the less developed countries has been exacerbated, of course, by the COVID-19 epidemic. So that in fact we'll be taking back more than we give, but that's even assuming that the 100 billion is actually going to be delivered. I'll come back to that in a minute. But one thing I noticed, because I was at the climate march and rally on Saturday, one thing I noticed was that hardly anybody was talking about debt. There were lots of interesting slogans, lots of campaigns. For example, people were connecting the climate crisis to money spent on arms and on military investment. But I saw hardly anybody raising debt. Now, a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, youth protests in the West was all about debt. I remember 10, 15 years ago, people were always going on to demonstrations saying, cancel the debt. But it seems that apart from one or two people, everyone had forgotten about that. So is debt a big issue that we really need to come back to? So can you,
I think
Siobhan?
yeah? I remember, you're a child of the 80s, and we talked a lot about debt back then as well, in terms of kind of Latin American countries and so forth as well. But it's an interesting one, because I think that the debt, you said that, the debt's been exacerbated through COVID, but actually the debt's been exacerbated because of climate crisis, because as things become more and more difficult, and the debt will get higher and higher if we're not going to change that. I would agree with Kaossara. I think that, I think if you think about what the Scottish Government are trying to do in Scotland, and that is kind of develop a wellbeing economy, and that's resetting the economic structure. So basically thinking about people first, so making the economy work for people rather than what it's been over the last 30, 40 years, the people working for the economy. So there's a reset there on a national level, but I think that needs to be done at an international level. And I think we need to start thinking not about kind of, some countries own debt to other countries, but actually completely reset the international economy by making sure we're vulnerable are treated well first. So the well-being of everyone in an international prospect. So if you think about Scotland and what we're trying to do is basically we're trying to kind of reduce poverty. We're looking at the most vulnerable people first and trying to kind of raise those up and trying to kind of build well-being and better health and less poverty. That on an international level, I think, has to be done. And that gets me back to the debt, because the debt's an interesting one, because it's this weird, vicious economic cycle, isn't it? It's like we cause the problems, and then they've got to clean up the mess, and then we lend them money to clean up the mess, and then we come in and try and kind of, say, well, you need to repay that debt. So it's a real kind of quite vicious cycle that we're in here. So I'm in agreement with Kaossara. I think that one of the things that we need to do is basically wipe the debt. And these are the difficult international economic decisions that we now have to make. We need to stop the extremes of extremely rich and extremely poor, and that's on a national and international level, and make sure we have this levelling process. And what that means is a massive refiguration of wealth coming from the top, from the most wealthy to the poorer. And that's wealthy nations to poorer nations, not as a debt, not as a favour, as Kaossara was talking about earlier on. They're not subject to our favours. We owe them this. We owe these countries this because we're the ones that have been responsible for it. That is our responsibility. Clear the debt and honour at least, and it's 100 billion annually, by the way, honour at least that 100 billion each year to build that. So yeah, I would agree with that. Cancel the debt and we have to radically rethink our international economic structure because everybody is in this now.
A radical rethink. The final request or the final demand that Kaossara has made on her paper, which she was kind enough to send us earlier on, is that we need climate justice and climate reparation. So it's our debt. It's our debt to the people who are carrying the burden. And again, Kaossara has echoed what Vanessa Nakati has been saying here in Glasgow this week, that we're not talking about warnings of climate disaster. We're talking about the reality of it right here and right now. In fact, again, if I can quote your paper, Kaossara, you've said, the saddest aspect of the broken promise that the 100 billion might not, in fact, be available until 2023 or after, is that by 2023, so many more people will have died. In fact, you've pointed out in this paper that today, climate change is costing the lives of thousands in Madagascar. Before our very eyes, you've said, floods have displaced millions of people, and also in Bangladesh. So just to quote those two. And yet the G20 countries ignore the fact that we are responsible, having caused the problem in the first place. So it's all about us saying, it's not that you owe us, Kaossara, we actually owe you because we've done the damage. And it really is, you saying, is it our moral responsibility to fix the damage that we have caused? Kaossara, can you hear that? So it's our responsibility to make the reparations and to repair our own damage. I'll just turn to you, Siobhan, on that point. So is climate reparation a slogan that makes sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I wouldn't have phrased it as reparation, but just taking responsibility to a certain extent. But yeah, I can see the point of that because it comes back to the same thing that, you know, we kind of have to clean up our own mess, really, don't we? And it also, I think, I suppose the concept of reparation for me it suggests a kind of a south versus north kind of dynamic. But I think that we need to start thinking a lot less in terms of kind of developed countries versus, developing countries, but much more as we're all one part of one globe and therefore we all share the wealth and resources. And an equal share of the wealth and an equal share of the resources and an equal share of the technology, an equal share of kind of, the strategies and the plans that we need to do, everybody would benefit. And so it's a kind of, for me, it just, reparation, it almost feels like it's just a balancing out of what's not happened before and what needs to happen for the future.
Yes, so it's all about new strategies for the future. Now, let me turn to the question of how much global warming is acceptable. And you did say earlier on, I think you said, Kaossara, the planet doesn't mind, right? Who owes who. The planet doesn't mind who's to blame. It's a question of how much of a technical increase. Can you hear me just now, Kaossara? I think that line's gone, but we'll come back to you if we can get you in a minute. We've been talking this week on Broadcasting Scotland about, how hot do you want your planet to be? The Paris Climate Change Conference, of course, the previous one, 2015, gave two targets. There's 1.5 or there's maybe 2. Right. Do you want 1.5 degrees in your planet or do you want 2 degrees? We discussed a few days ago, Siobhan, a report from University of Melbourne to say that with business as usual, we will end up with 1.9. And of course, the other figure that was mentioned earlier on today was that under business as usual, the planet might well go to 2.7 degrees centigrade. So how hot do we want it to be? Now, we shouldn't forget that at the moment we have 1.1. That's the official figure, I believe. The mean average temperature rise since pre-industrial times is about 1.1 degrees centigrade. And Siobhan, that 1.1 degrees is already causing increased storms, increased flooding. And the damage in Madagascar and Bangladesh, which Kaossara referred to earlier on. So 1.1 is bad enough. So 1.5 isn't good, is it? That's the minimum we can take to survive. Are you happy with 1.5 or should we? Go ahead.
I mean, 1.5 is the goal, isn't it? And ideally, we should be trying to get it as low as we can. I think that the notion of if Kaossara is back, then that's probably
Kaossara, I'm sorry, we keep losing the line. We were discussing the idea that the COP leaders seem to be quite happy to accept 1.5%. Like, can you see that 1.5%, is that good enough, or should we be trying to reduce consumption and in fact stop temperature from increasing above where it is now? We're having difficulty with the line to Lomé. So can you hear me now, Kaossara? So 1.5 degrees is meant to be the absolute limit. But at the moment, the planet is going to heat beyond 1.5. So is our target not good enough? I think that line's still proving difficult. We'll see if we can go back to. Okay, yeah, we're having a hard time with that line. Listen, Kaossara, I'll just carry on. Just come in if we can get your line. Just come in anytime. So is it going to be 1.5? So the point I was making there is that we've got to recognise that 1.5 is recognised by scientists as a kind of a tipping point. So there's this idea behind the science that you don't just get gradual increases. What happens with climate and with ocean currents and with atmospheric currents is for a while you get small incremental changes, but then suddenly you reach a dangerous tipping point where the whole thing topples over into a new system. So 1.5 and 1.9, that's not just two choices. 1.5 is going to be dangerous. 1.9 might be catastrophic. Nice. So why would we go for one fraction above 1.5 if we're going to kill ourselves?
Well, I mean, it's that kind of notion, isn't it? It's like we need to go towards we need a goal that we have to work towards. 1.5 is difficult to do. And there is no getting around that. This is difficult, and it does require massively difficult choices. Barack Obama was talking about that today. These are not going to be easy choices individually, collectively, internationally. These are not easy choices to make, but they have to be done if we want them down to, if we want to reduce the kind of temperature rise to 1.5%. The methane initiative is maybe one of the, I think for me, one of the positive things that's maybe come out of COP, that the attempt to reduce the methane output by 30%. Over the next few years is something that's quite good, because obviously methane actually holds more heat than CO2. It's also in the atmosphere shorter term, so it can allow us some literal breathing space as well as metaphorical breathing space to kind of do that. If we stick to the methane reduction, then it'll take 0.5 off the global temperatures within the next 80 years. So there's some hope from the COP26. It's also easier to kind of reduce methane than carbon dioxide as well, CO2. So in that respect, it's one of the positive things. But these are difficult decisions. There's no doubt about it, and I do think it requires quite a kind of a rethink of how we live and how we build our economy, how we build our societies, how we connect we each other across the globe. It's difficult. 1.5 is extraordinarily difficult to do, and we will never do it. And I know I keep going back to the point, and hopefully Kaossara will come in and back me up on this one, but we will never do it if we don't deal with the fossil fuel emissions. We won't do it. We simply won't do it if we can't deal with that.
Yes, Kaossara. Yes, Siobhan and I were agreeing that keeping the temperature rise to 1.5 is not going to be easy. Can you hear me just now, Kaossara? That's I think that line's gone, but we'll see if we can get Kaossara again before we finish the programme. But one of the points she made was about our overconsumption, the G20 countries simply using up more of the Earth's resources than we really need. Now, the tone of what we've said just now, really, this evening, is that it's not easy, right? If it was easy to reduce the temperature, we'd have done it, yeah. We'd have to give up a lot. Now, how much do you think you would give up? Supposing you and I both gave up 50% of our consumption, or 50% of our mileage, or 50% of our central heating. Do you think life, Siobhan, would be miserable? And what is it that the famous quote said? Life would be nasty, brutish, and short. Who was it said that? That was Hobbes, I think.
Well,
so do you think you could survive with a bit less?
Well, we can, but it's not really the point, isn't it? I mean, if we all make individual sacrifices, it's still not going to be enough. We're talking about kind of the highest or the richest part of the population are the ones that have the most emissions. That's internationally, but that's also as well as rich individuals as well. We're talking things like private jets. That was actually quite a good discussion on debate night last week. I would probably recommend that. So there's issues we could, as individuals, we can do certain things, but it will not be enough because we're not the ones as an individual who are actually responsible for the massive emissions. It's the large multinational companies. It's the extraordinarily rich billionaires that are talking about going into space. To not to name anybody in particular, it's those kind of things that need to be curbed. It's that excessive lifestyle. It's that excessive profit making, and it's that excessive capitalism that needs to be curbed. We have to make individual sacrifices. Sure, I was just thinking the other day about an electric car, thinking about kind of heat pump and all that kind of stuff. These will make a difference, but they won't make enough of a difference. We have to actually start tackling it at a much more deep-seated level and at a multinational level and at a company level as well. That's where the huge emissions come from. We have to take, I get the individual point, I get the kind of change in lifestyle and stuff like that. We're all going to have to do that, but it's actually the biggest. I want to say sacrifices, but I don't even think it would be sacrifices because it's the result of excess anyway. So in that respect, it's those kind of things that need to be challenged. We can all do our part, but part of what we need to do is challenge the economic model that creates the excess in the first place. I think that's probably the single biggest thing we can do beyond, kind of recycling and all those kind of wee things.
It's about excess and it's about rich and poor. And it's also about political power. And yes, Kaossara, we've just been discussing the idea of how difficult it is for peoples in the West to maybe change their lifestyles. But one of the reasons we don't is because of political power. And do you see that there's any possibility of a major change in lifestyles and a major change in political power in the West? Do we have to remove powerful blocks?
Yeah, I see. I will speak quickly because of my network. I think the West have to rethink the concept of happiness. Yes, that's the problem. That's what do we want? Everyone wants to feel happy, to feel good, to feel, love, to feel something special. That's what we are looking for in this world. We are not looking for, big things. It's this feeling which is pushing people, which is enticing people to waste money, to overconsume, maybe to hurt other people just to show them that I have this, I have that. What is happiness for you in Western countries? For me, happiness is maybe wake up and hear the birds singing around me, maybe near my window. But I think you have to rethink this concept of happiness. Happiness doesn't mean have a lot of shoes, a lot of clothes, everything too much, and then you throw it away, and then it becomes dumpster in Africa. Yeah, that's it. We have poor people, they will take it. So I have the right to do everything. No, what's the meaning of happiness? And this concept, this happiness is impacting the climate also, because it is this thing which is pushing people to overconsume, and also with the role of media and advertising to entice people's minds. It's like manipulation. We are living, I used to say that we are living in the 1984 of George Orwell. We already, we even did more than this fiction. So we have to rethink everything.
Yeah, now that's a really interesting point. We will finish in a couple of minutes, Kaossara, but I'm really glad you raised that point at the end, that surely the point of our culture, the point of our economy is to increase happiness. And we sometimes forget about that. When you look at the advertising, as you point out, and when you look at the whole capitalist market economy that Siobhan talked about, you get one thing all the time. You get happiness is having more things. Happiness is traveling more miles. Traveling is happiness is having a bigger house. But it's not, and you're quite right to point that out. So maybe what we need is, I don't know how easy this is to achieve, but we need to completely turn upside down the values of our society, and we have to question, what are we trying to achieve in our lives? It's really that fundamental, isn't it, Siobhan? Can we do that? Can we ask ourselves, what is the root of happiness?
And it's also worth noting as well that, like, you know, certain studies have kind of shown that actually the pursuit of a non-consumerist lifestyle does lead to better happiness anyway. So it's a false happiness that we're being sold even at that. You know, consume does not give us happiness. It just pretends that it does. So yes, it's a kind of an absolute kind of, I love that idea that, you know, rethinking happiness. I think that's probably the takeaway quote for tonight, is that that's what the West have to do. We have to rethink what our idea of happiness is. Because I think if we do, rather ironically, we will become happier for it anyway, and healthier, and actually, as we're talking about now, safer. And that's the kind of biggest thing that we're hearing now as well. It's like this is about the safety of people across the globe.
Right, well, just yes, I think we can agree on that. Then we need to redirect our values in society. I'm going to finish with one more question, which is to you, Kaossara. I'm talking about optimism or pessimism. Here in Glasgow again, Greta Thunberg said last week that she thought the whole thing was going to be a failure before it starts. The First Minister of Scotland also has said today that she's optimistic. It's a difficult road, but she's optimistic that progress can be made. In this COP, Kaossara, do you feel optimistic or pessimistic?
You know, I don't believe in any COP. I'm very optimistic myself. I'm very optimistic, and I'm also pragmatic. I'm seeing the reality. How is it? But you know, hope is hard to kill. I always say that you cannot, because hope is life. If you don't have it, you will go depressed. And I think we need it. And seeing young people all around the world, people like Greta, all these people getting out, hitting the streets, pushing your government, it gave hope. It gave me hope. And I can say that that's why I'm keep pushing the things, like I'm still using my voice. You know, I should be somewhere enjoying my own life. But seeing all these people is encouraging me. It's giving me more positive thought that there is still something we can save, even if a lot of things are already destroyed, but we can save the least which is remain. So we have to be optimistic and opportunistic also, if we have the opportunity to make.
Well, let's finish on that note of hope and optimism from Lomi and from Kaossara Sani. So it's great to have you joining us tonight. I'm sorry we had difficulties with communication. Siobhan, I think it was wonderful to hear what Kaossara had to say. I'm going to see if we can put the statement that she sent us earlier on our website. I think that would be good if we could get that up for people to read, because it was a bit difficult to get the line from Lomi over there. So I'm just finishing a few minutes late because we had to start a bit late because the link wasn't up too well tonight. So once again, Siobhan, thank you for joining us tonight. And if you can still hear me in Lomi, Kaossara, thank you for joining us. It was wonderful to talk to you tonight. And well, that's just about it for Broadcasting in Scotland tonight. So once again, thank you for joining us. And of course, if you want to help contribute, you're already contributing by watching. So thank you for logging on. And I know several of you have already helped us financially. So that's great. Thanks. So tell a friend, spread the word. If you want more independent broadcasting about Scotland and about world affairs from the Scottish point of view, then please consider helping. There's a link below, and we'd be very pleased to receive any donations, of course, and any other offers of help. So that's the way it looks for us at Scotland in 7 tonight on Monday the 8th. So Andrew will be with you tomorrow, and I'll see you again later. So thanks again for watching and tuning in, and thank you to Kaossara Sani over in Lomé, and thank you to Siobhan Tolland from closer to home. Okay, that's it for tonight. Good night. Okay.